Okay. So again, Jordan, thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation. This is our second conversation in the series. I'm still kind of workshopping the title, but Nubia was gracious enough to do the first one as we were kind of doing an introduction. She also won in your same year, and thank you so much for having our second, conversation. For those who may be new to this, so last month, I kind of started a series where I'm interviewing collectors. So far, Nubia and Jordan are both book collectors. There may be some collectors who may have a collection that are a little bit outside of the purview of books. But this is, one of the projects kind of out of the Facebook group that centers around, collecting books from the African diaspora. Um, so, Jordan, I don't know if you want to give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and how you became a collector, and then we'll, get right into the conversation.
Yeah, sure. And it's a pleasure for the invitation and again to be around other collectors. So again, my name is Jordan Ross. I'm originally from Odenton, Maryland. Um, my collecting journey, it started in undergrad at Morehouse. And the reason why it began at Morehouse is because when I got into the institution, everybody was like, "Oh, you need to get this book on the history of Morehouse. Like, it's called A Candle in the Dark. Make sure when you get to campus, you get this book." I was like, "Okay, bet." Got to campus and went into the bookstore, and I told the staff, like, "Oh, yeah, I'm looking for the Morehouse history book." They had chuckled a little bit, and I was like, "All right, like, what's the deal behind that?" And it was because they were like, "This book has been out of print since like the 70s, 80s. It came out in 1967." I was like, okay. So then I go to Spelman, our sister institution across the street, and I asked for their history book. The same thing. It was like, oh, this book's been out of print since like the 1980s, 1990s. And ever since like that moment, I started collecting these different books. So I ended up eventually getting a copy of the history book for A Candle in the Dark. And I just started collecting all these books about Black colleges and universities because I was just interested in having them because they were rare and you could go in the library and get them, but there was something that was different about having ownership and creating your own library of books. So that's where the collector in me and the bibliophile in me began.
Wow, that's interesting because I know, I also like to kind of read, books about books and, how book collectors kind of got their start. And it seems for a lot
Hmm.
of collectors, like you kind of get this bug and, you get bitten.
Hmm.
Once you kind of get on the hunt or pursuit for a certain book, it kind of
Hmm.
takes over and that feeling, I don't know, maybe you could call it a high and it just, you want to keep searching. And then even more so, I think, your story is so important because these books that are quite important are so rare. I know I have one book on Morehouse. You may have it. It's by Benjamin Brawley. Um,
Yeah, so I have a first edition of that, and that was one of
oh,
my like very prized possessions. There is a new history book about Morehouse that just came out in February by Marcellus Barksdale, who he had been working on that book for about 15 years or so, something like it was a long time.
mm,
So there are history books that are widely accessible now. That is the newest update for that history book.
definitely. And the one you said there's one that just came out.
Yeah, it's called The Candle, the Cross, and the Crown.
Okay. Candle across the crown. Okay, thanks. I'm definitely gonna have to look that up. So could you just tell us how did you learn about the David Ruggles Prize and, what made
Hmm.
you want to apply for this prize? Thank you so
Yeah,
much for putting that in the chat.
yeah, I got you. It was interesting. I remember one day, so I'm a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania, so I study history and education. And I besides myself being a bibliophile, like I also study bibliophiles too. And there was this big like book conference, a rare book conference or something like that. Um, that was in Philadelphia. And I remember I just came there and I seen like this little bookmark that it had David Ruggles on it. I was like, oh, I know who David Ruggles is. And so, and then I saw that it was like, oh, well, apply for the competition or the prize or whatever. And I think I just always had it like in the back of my mind, like, oh, I'm gonna apply for this because I just didn't know. Because number one, I had never met, well, I didn't even realize I was like a collector. Like it wasn't really until I began to think about PhD programs and I wanted to do some research as a historian that I realized like, hey, I want to be a historian who studies bibliophiles, but I'm also realizing I do that too because I was just collecting stuff that I liked. But when I saw that at the rare book conference, it just, kind of stuck with me. And I was telling Pat, like, I was like, oh, you have to continue to send out like paper material, marketing materials, because you just never know that somebody might be able to pick up these things. But I thought the bookmark was so unique, and especially thinking about who David Ruggles is.
Right, absolutely. And that marketing piece is definitely key. I know Nubia was nice enough to connect me with one of the sponsors who sent a bunch of bookmarks, and I'm
Hmm.
definitely going to be, distribute them to, people
Hmm.
in Chicago and just, in my path. Because I think, because I don't know if a lot of people necessarily know about it. And I
Hmm.
wish, I'm too old, but when I found out about it, but, I've mentioned before, if I was 35 or younger, I definitely, would
Hmm.
have applied. Um, so how long have you been a collector? And also have you always embraced that term,
Hmm.
quote unquote collector? Why or why not? So it's kind of a two-part question. You can answer them in whatever order.
So let's see, my freshman year undergrad, so I was 2014. So the fall of 2014 is when I started. I did not necessarily embrace the term collector. I didn't realize I was doing it. It was just something that I just had. And my professors, like they had their extensive libraries and their offices and stuff like that. I just thought it was something that, you do. But it was not. I'd say that in the last probably 3 years that I've really embraced like, oh, you're actually a collector. I mean, a collector, Jordan. Like you really are collecting these different materials and these different things. I even have like a name for it, like Black collegiate histories and textbooks. So I'm interested in things that relate to the history of Black colleges, but also the types of materials and the things that they read as textbooks and some of these things. So you mentioned Benjamin Brawley, like I have a first edition of A Social History of the American Negro from 1921. And this was one of the books that showed up on a syllabus for Tuskegee where they're learning about Black history. So stuff like that was really interesting to me to like, hey, this is some of the stuff that people were learning Black history in the classroom in the early 20th century. This was not necessarily just a contemporary movement within the 1960s. Um, and I think that when I started to really have like a title over my collection and started to realize this was an actual thing, that's when I embraced it. I was like, look, I'm a collector.
Definitely. I know you've already kind of mentioned some of the books that are in your collection, and
Hmm.
are there any other books or authors that you deem as most prized or valued? I know that's tends to be a hard question. I know when people ask me if you want to highlight some
Hmm.
certain books or pieces in your collection that you think are the most prized or valued, however you know
Hmm.
classify prize or value or important.
Yeah, it's interesting. So like, and I'm also like in the midst of moving, so like my collection is like spread out.
Hmm.
But one of the books that I bought with the Ruggles Prize was It's called A History of the American Negro by John Wesley Cromwell, and it was a first edition. And that book, I mean, like it means a lot to me because of um the fact again that was another textbook that was taught in the classroom at Tuskegee and other institutions, but also the way in which that book came to be was because John Wesley Cromwell was talking to some students at Hampton and they didn't believe in that Black people had a history or whatever. And he said, you know, we have to correct that. And he decided to develop that book. And that was like a awesome prize. But one of the books I do have, and it's like, it's so hard to find, even though this book came out in 1990. And it was like at the time, one of the only books about Black collectors. It's called Black Bibliophiles and Collectors,
Yeah,
Preservers of Black History. This
that's a great one.
book, like, when I tell you, like, it took me a while. I think it took me like a couple years of like constant searches on eBay to figure out. And then all of a sudden, I'd say within like the last year or so, the prices skyrocket for this book now because there's only like a handful of books out there about Black folks collecting materials. And it's helped me tremendously with my dissertation research. And you know, like probably about a couple years ago, I had spoke with Laura Helton. Laura Helton has a book called Scattered and Fugitive Things that came out, I think, last year, which is kind of like a sequel to that book. But this is one of my favorite finds to have, just because this is an entire tradition itself, and you know, it's been so difficult.
Definitely. You know, that book came up when I was talking with Nubia, and we were both talking about
Hmm.
how scarce, the book is, and now the prices are just exorbitant.
Hmm.
I think, when I was, and I'm another group I'm in of collectors, somebody looked it up on Amazon, and it was in the, you know, couple thousand. It was quite exorbitant.
Ridiculous.
Right, right. And everyone has a similar story. Like it took, years to find a book that was affordable. And so I guess because of that scarcity, it's just, the price is
Hmm.
just out of this world now. Um, and it would be nice, I don't know, I think if I'm not because I know what my understanding, the history of book, there was a conference that took place, I
Hmm.
think, at Morehouse that Paul Coates and the other authors were kind of, facilitators of in the 90s. So I don't
Hmm.
know, I guess it may be proprietary with Morehouse because I was thinking it'd be nice if,
Oh,
Paul
you
Coates.
mean Howard? Howard. Yes,
I'm
it was at
sorry,
Howard.
Howard. My bad.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, Howard. Maybe it's proprietary at Howard. It'd be nice if Paul Coates, I know he has, Black Classic Press, if they could do a reprinting of it, but it probably is underneath,
I
the
also heard there was a second conference, and this was
Oh,
like
really?
in the early 2000s or something like that.
Hmm.
I think yeah, Greg Carr at Howard was talking about it. Like this was not the only conference that they
Oh,
had.
wow.
There were multiple or a couple conferences to
Okay.
talk about that tradition. But yeah, because Howard University Press is not in a press anymore,
Oh, really?
which
Okay.
published that book, but it's a really important text for folks that I think that people appreciate.
Right, for sure, no doubt. Um, so how do you acquire many of your books? Do you have, some favorite places that you like to go to acquire some of your books?
So honestly, it kind of just began on Amazon and eBay. Like and my mom, like, I guess she's the one that kind of put me on to it, was because we were trying to find this Candle in the Dark book. So the only reason why I was able to get um a Candle in the Dark was because my mom found it on eBay. She had like a alert when they would tell you when things would be alerted for either Amazon or for eBay, and that's how I just started finding books was through Amazon and eBay. And for me, it was because a lot of families didn't know what they had. They were just trying to get rid of stuff. So I could get
Hmm.
it for a decent price.
Hmm.
Because at some bookstores you'll find some stuff, but they'll know how like this is a rare book, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm gonna charge you $800, $1,000." It was like I just don't have the capacity to do that at this
Hmm.
moment. So for me, I will if there's a text that I want, I will have like a save search on eBay to where eBay will notify me if this pops up, or on Amazon this book will pop up. There's some other stuff like there's another site like called Rare Americana. That's another site that I did get a couple of books. So I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and I got a 1939
Wow.
edition of the history book by Charles Wesley
Mm.
from that website. And he has some decent prices, even though he knows like that some of these books, like these prized possessions, are pretty rare. And I haven't, even with me living in Philadelphia, like at the time, like have not explored all of the bookstores in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
Um, and there, I'll go every once in a while, doing book hunting, but I do like to sit, in the luxury of my own place and just look at books, or now look at the Facebook group and see, like, you don't put me onto books I have never heard of that I'm like just now like, oh wow, these are nice finds, and trying to put alerts on them.
And how is it? Because I feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know if you've picked up Pros to the People, which is
Hmm.
dedicated to Black bookstores. But I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of Black bookstores have kind of gone out of business over the
Hmm.
years. But I feel like Philadelphia still has,
Hmm.
quite a few Black bookstores, from, Uncle Bobby's to
Hmm. The
there's one
Hakeem's.
exactly Hakeem's.
Hmm.
And so I feel like Philadelphia still has, a good number of bookstores. Again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're there, but how
There
do
are
you find them?
there are, are bookstores that are around. It's just that the titles that you may be looking for are like maybe super rare. And it's like even stuff in like the 90s. So like even my dad, I didn't even realize my dad was like a collector because he just gave me some books. Like when I was in high school, and it was like Ivan Van Sertima books that were super
Mm,
expensive now, and that I just couldn't afford to get them because they were out of print and people knew how valuable they were. And I think but he was in DC. Like he went to like it's called Pyramid Bookstore, and he
hmm.
was
Hmm.
collecting, Black books from there. But people have them like, in their own places. But and some folks don't even realize that they're rare books now because they're like, oh, this book came out in the 1990s. People were thinking that a rare book has to be something from like the 1920s or early 1900s. So,
Right, definitely. Have you found, I know, on eBay, sometimes it can kind of be hit or miss in terms of prices, and there's certain things, I was discussing with Nubia. Had been recently looking at, I try to pick up like the old Negro Digest and
hmm.
uh it was Negro Digest and Black World when I can, but it just seems like on eBay the prices of them now are just extremely astronomical. And even like Ebony Jr., oh my goodness, that is just, I mean, out of this
Hmm.
world. um and so I've been lucky enough to kind of find some locally in Chicago, certain places, kind of unassuming places. But I'm saying all that to say, I know you mentioned eBay is kind of one of the go-to places. Have Do you find you've kind of been more successful than not in finding some of these rare things, or do you see these prices are, really going to the extreme end? And one of the things we I talked about with Nubia is this kind of idea of gatekeeping, and
Hmm.
who can afford these materials and who can't afford these materials, and
Hmm.
who has ownership of these materials and are putting these exorbitant prices on materials, and the level of gatekeeping that does
Hmm.
for folks who
Hmm.
look like us who may not can afford those materials. I mean, what is your kind of opinion or experience on that?
So during the pandemic, there was a bit of a break where people were just putting all different types of stuff on eBay and it was for a decent price. Like so I'll never forget, I have a third edition from 1907 of The Souls of Black Folk by Du Bois, and I only
Mm,
paid $50 for it. And the only
wow.
reason why I paid $50 for it was because someone was like, I'm just trying to get rid of stuff. I put it on eBay because it's the pandemic and I'm just, doing stuff on the internet. And I got that book and it's an authentic, you know, book. And there are sometimes you can find these different things. Like you just gotta look every once in a while, be patient. But there are like I'd say in the last, especially 2 years, like things have definitely increased because people are becoming more interested in these African Americana materials. So it's a bit of a hit or miss. And Amazon sometimes you can also really find a treasure. Because sometimes like on Amazon, you'll see a certain edition for a book and you may think it's like a current edition, but you buy it and someone just put it in the wrong place and it's actually like a first or a second edition of that particular book. So I've had that happen to me a couple of times,
Wow.
but it depends on the book. So some books people will find and they're like immediately will get it. And then there are some books that will kind of sit on there. And you got to know what you're looking for too, because some folks don't know about certain books that exist. Like they'll just sit there and it may be a rare book to you, but to someone else, like they may think it's just something.
Right, for sure. Um, so you've kind of already addressed your focus for your collection and the type of books that you collect. How many books are currently in your collection?
I'd
If you
say
don't know
about
exactly.
200. It's
Okay.
roughly 200, but since me and my wife like we combine our collection together, it's probably way more than that now. But um I'd say but within my 200, there are about 50 books that I consider them like these are rare books to me.
Mm,
And it's spread out, you know, from the early 19th century all the way to like the 1990s, early
mhm.
2000s in that particular era. Um, so that's a rough estimate of the amount. Like I feel like I need to do like a catalog of my like what I have just to kind of like conceptualize, what does that look like?
Cool. And that's good for, especially for the type of books that you're collecting, as you already kind of talked about how rare books are,
Hmm.
about HBCU. So that's excellent that you've been able to, accumulate that number.
Hmm.
Um, do you have a particular vision or goal for your collection? If so, what is that vision or goal?
I always say like I do want to donate the collection and I don't want to like wait until like forever to donate those materials because I don't know, like I feel like people kind of need some of these different books and stuff like that, but you also want to make sure that they are cherished. So I go back and forth about what I want to do with the collection because at first I'm like, I want to have like a Black collegiate history and textbook collection for somebody to where if they're interested in learning about Black colleges and universities or just Black history that was taught within classrooms, whether that's K through 12 or college, in universities, they can go and look up that collection. But that's something that I'm actively trying to think through. And to be honest, like I don't know.
And then Nubia had a question in the chat. She was saying HBCUs are your niche in terms of your collecting of books.
Yeah, for now. It's just because again, like it was so um rare to find some of these materials and some of these things. Like for most Black colleges and universities, those history books are out of print for most of them. We're talking about a good like 80-90% of Black colleges and universities, the history books for those institutions are out of print. So me seeing that, I was really invested in just trying to like, okay, how can I collect some of these different things to where if folks want to know about some of these institutions, especially the ones that closed or have been renamed. So like the original Atlanta University in Atlanta does not exist. They combine with Clark College, so now they're Clark Atlanta University. But that old tradition, like there are folks that are still alive who graduated from the Atlanta University, but the history books on Atlanta University tells you why that tradition is so important, why they were such an elite institution, why somebody like W.E.B. Du Bois taught there for so long. So I've just been trying to recover those histories.
Definitely. And it's I think you can tell me your opinion on it, but I know I have a couple of books that kind of detail the history of when certain HBCUs were set up.
Hmm.
Like I acquired this two-volume set that's a bunch of letters basically between the Slater Foundation, which was kind of
Hmm.
the financial arm that set up some of the HBCUs, and Rutherford B. Hayes, I believe. Um, and then it's I probably should have had these books out, but it's a book. This is called Our Brother in Black. I don't know if you can see this.
Ooh.
His Freedom and His Future. This is by Atticus G. Haygood, who was one of the trustees of the Slater Foundation or
Ooh.
Fund. And it's another book. It's failing me. But these are books that were by whites at the time who, of course, I'm reading it with 21st century eyes, but,
Hmm.
reading these books and, there is one that centers on like Hampton University. And,
Hmm.
from their perspective, they would claim that they're being very benevolent. Uh,
Hmm.
and, on some levels, maybe you can argue they were in terms of supporting, education for African Americans.
Hmm.
But at the same time, reading their descriptions of blacks and
Hmm.
it tinges with a lot of racism.
Hmm.
And so I guess I'm saying that to say I appreciate the books about HBCUs that are written, by African Americans.
Hmm.
You certainly get,
Hmm.
you know, a more honest, complete picture. And I don't know if you
Hmm.
experienced that in terms of, you
No,
know,
it's true. It's very true. And or depending on there are some books that are written by some Black folks, but it's funded by a particular white philanthropist organization, and they have to be careful on how they tell certain things. So
Mhm.
I'd say that even for with Morehouse's history book, Brawley, even though Brawley is like the man at the time, he was like the youngest Morehouse graduate ever, and he wrote this book in like 1917. It's not as honest as A Candle in the Dark,
Mhm.
that history book. And even now with the third book with Dr. Barksdale's book, it's even more honest. And it's crazy because um well, Barksdale's book goes from it goes from 1867, which was when Morehouse was founded, all the way until 2021. So the
Mhm.
years that I was in school from 2014 until 2018, it talks about those years. So to see the honesty of like what's going on behind the scenes and all these
Right.
different things and stuff like that, I do, and I think that that's why Black authorship was so important during these
Mhm.
different times was because you get those honest perspectives. Um, and just that experience that folks are putting into the pages.
Absolutely. And that I'm glad you mentioned that because I know I this past year had recently acquired the uh papers um of Booker T. Washington. It's
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
17 volumes. And you know, you know about the debate and sort of the theory of thought that Booker T. Washington had as it
Hmm.
relates to W.B. Du Bois.
Hmm.
But I have to say, and I have not read through all, 17 volumes, but um that and it's other books I'm sure that talk about this, but the reading that was really enlightening to me because I didn't know just how I don't know. I want to say I don't want to be disrespectful of Booker T. Washington's legacy, but there were things that he did that were um how can I put it?
Controversial.
Controversial, exact,
Hmm.
and he definitely, I feel like, used his influence and power in ways um to that were not always to the benefit of other black leaders at the time,
Hmm.
to you know boost up Tuskegee and himself
Hmm.
and things like that. And there were things he did that could be, you could say, just kind of downright borderline scandalous,
Hmm.
in terms of, and so and this is to take nothing away from his legacy and what
Hmm.
and Tuskegee and all of that, but when you were talking about how money can influence messaging, it just made me think about Booker T. Washington and the type of influence that he had. And I guess you could say he was, kind of, he was kind of a gatekeeper. I don't know if you
Hmm.
agree with this
Hmm.
in ways.
Hmm.
And, white people at the time, put him in positions where he could kind of make decisions about other black institutions. And
Hmm.
he, used that power a lot to, bolster Tuskegee. And I mean, I get it, he started Tuskegee, but looking back on it, or reading some of the letters and some of the things that he did, just kind of, oh,
Mm.
I don't know if you have those same feelings.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, he's a human being at the end of the day. And I guess, we look at these folks, especially back, the late 19th century, early 20th century, as our like heroes and stuff like that, but they have like tremendous flaws, like insane. Same thing with like Du Bois. Some of the things Du Bois did, it was just like, what? Like how can, these people that you read about do these things? But I think for me, I just see them as like, I stopped becoming surprised after I just learned that so many, these folks have a past or they have certain flaws and stuff like that. So,
right, right, for sure. Um, so, in our current political climate, and we see, there's an aggressive move to, actively ban black books,
hmm.
scrubbing black history from government websites, or creating some type of revisionist history, or sanitize, black history in public schools, or even what, is being done in colleges and universities. Um, First of all, how does this make you feel? And then how does this impact your work, or how you see yourself as a black book collector?
Um, so it just doesn't surprise me. Um, I feel like I've constantly been going through this like a long time and um like I don't know, like even when I got to Morehouse, there was already a lot of violent things going on. Like I remember my first day of class, it was on my birthday and Mike Brown had passed away like during that
Mhm.
time. So I began like my college years kind of like going through all this different stuff. My first time being able to vote in the presidential election was during the Trump Clinton race, and constantly like going to grad school during the pandemic and going and doing all these things. So for me, all of these different things don't surprise me. And it's honestly the only reasons like why I continue collecting. Because I want to stop. I do because it's such an expensive habit. But I feel like I need to continue to collect because I just don't know what's going to happen. Like, what about if the internet shuts off for like a while, like, and we don't have access to certain things like literature on the internet? Like, what happens when these stories, let's say, yes, let's say that books, if you're seen with a particular book out in public, like if there are consequences for that, well, how do you move through that? What if there are certain stuff that is accessible for free online? What if that is completely scrubbed from the internet? So how do you react when things could possibly get worse than they are now? Um, and so for me, like it's emphasize the importance of collecting and even thinking about the tradition of collecting. So like my dissertation research is on the Black bibliophiles here in Philadelphia and tracing that tradition from the 19th century all the way to Bloxon. And just seeing how important these things are, because if they were at a time where collecting was dangerous, even more than it is now. Like William Steele, he buries his archival collection in a graveyard because he was found in connection to John Brown, and they were coming for his archival materials. So thinking
Mm,
about the risk that people have taken to preserve Black history and to also distribute Black history. So for me, I just kind of take on that mission.
for sure. And it you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Philadelphia, um, historically, and it seems today is still a progressive city. It
Mhm.
still has a long presence of people of color. Have you seen any evidence of sort of this pressure that, the administration is kind of putting on institutions as it relates to anti-DEI stuff, woke stuff, whatever that means? Or do
Mhm.
you feel like, for the most part, Philadelphia is holding pretty good?
Um, I won't say that Philadelphia is holding pretty well because of like also just the focus on Penn, like the University of Pennsylvania, and how much attention that has gotten, especially within the anti-DEI movement. Like I remember all these DEI things were here during my first year. Now, as I finished my second year, like all of that stuff is gone. And it's like people are quietly doing things. Like, for example, when you walk around Philadelphia, most Philadelphians are like, the stuff that's going on is insane. But at the same time, you don't know about there are other people who are fine with these different things happening. So Philadelphia is a very interesting place, because um, you have so many different cultures, you have so many different folks. In Philadelphia, even though it's like a major city, it's very small to where you know everything that's going on. I could walk past somebody like across the street right now, and they know somebody that probably knows me or knows somebody that I know.
Wow.
So it's a bit of a complex story, but I think that Philadelphians have like an insane pride for Philadelphia too.
Mm,
Um, so I think that the city is at least trying to resist and hold on in that fact.
that's good. It being, you know, in the university yourself, currently working on your PhD and writing a dissertation that centers um, Black stories.
Mhm.
Do you feel a sense of worry about, what you are able to do, or funding or different things like that that feel comfortable, sharing?
So I'd say at the moment, no, because there's so much like solidarity amongst scholars that are like really interested in helping with this work. Um, So I'd say not at the moment. But again, that's why it wouldn't surprise me if things just get worse. So I try to like prepare myself for that. But there's not anything like, oh, you can't study African American history, or there are limitations to your scholarship and what you can do. I've never experienced that right now. But again, we'll see.
Yeah, well, I hope you don't have to experience that. Um, do you have any sort of Black book collector mentors, or others that you admire or consult with, or a part of your community is a black book collector or as a reader. These can be people who are living or alive. I know you mentioned your, dissertation and um,
Mhm.
things like that. So again, these can be living or alive. If you have any, sort of black mentors or anything like that.
What's so strange is that so I don't feel like I have any living Black bibliophile mentors. I feel like the people that I'm studying and the Black bibliophiles that are in that text of Black bibliophiles and collectors are like mentors to me because like I'm interested in being able to tell their story. So like one day, like I want to be able to write a biography of Henry Slaughter, who was a bibliophile in DC, and to tell his story. Reading people like Schomburg, I feel like unconsciously, like I take on the different things that they are saying and different messages that they wanted to preserve to people. I feel like those types of folks have really guided me. Like thinking about somebody I really admire is William Bolivar, um, who was a bibliophile here in Philadelphia. And Bolivar, the nice thing about him is he liked to give away a lot of books. So there's this tradition where these bibliophiles are giving away rare books for Christmas. And they would always make an effort to do that and to see that tradition amongst different folks is very, very interesting to me. Um, so to answer your question, I feel like a lot of the past Black bibliophiles, especially from the early 20th century, were my mentors. When I first got the pen, I wanted to meet Charles Blockson, but the semester I got there, he passed away. So I never
Mm,
got an opportunity to meet him and explore his brain on how he collects books and stuff like that.
right, definitely. And Charles Blockson, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, his collection is at Temple, is that correct?
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
Have you been able to see his
So I've seen a glimpse of it. I was looking for
uh,
some other things. I feel like that collection is like super huge and like even how I've come to understand his collecting practices has been through his biography called Damn Rare, which is a
mhm.
rare book now. Like that's another book like took
Right,
me forever. I'm like, how? And I remember seeing this book and you can get it for like $10 one day, and then all of a sudden it was like $500 that somebody was
right.
trying to sell it for. But reading like the biographies of these different folks or newspaper reports is how I come to find that guidance.
For sure, definitely. And it was a book I was reading. I don't know if it's the what's her name, Hilton book.
Laura Helton, yeah, Laura Helton.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if it was her book or in the 1990 bibliophile book, but they were talking about how Bloxon was such an aggressive buyer that other book collectors, when they would go like to certain stores, if they knew Bloxon had been there, they knew like he had
Yeah.
probably like gotten everything or whatever, because he was just such an aggressive buyer. And I guess people knew, he had a reputation, I guess, with a lot of different booksellers. And so,
Hmm.
he was able to acquire a lot of things. But I know even in my own, just reading about different book, because if I'm not mistaken, and I have Damn Rare as well, Newbie and I
Hmm.
talked about how the title is pretty much a self-fulfilling prophecy, because at this point
Hmm.
it's pretty damn rare.
Hmm.
And I actually found a copy unexpectedly at a used book sale here in Chicago, because
Hmm.
the book, like you were saying, is just so expensive.
Hmm.
But it seemed like a lot of the collectors, including Bloxon, I know you mentioned Schomburg, and there's others who kind of got their start because they got this negative messaging that either Black people didn't have a history,
Hmm.
or whatever history we had, there was negativity around it. And so it was kind of like collecting was almost this form of activism, if you will, to fight back against that negative messaging or just incorrect messaging,
Hmm.
that we didn't have a history, or don't have a history. And I kind of feel like this timeline that we're living in now. It seems to me, you can see, tell me if you have a different opinion, but kind of a seems to be a real backlash um against,
Mm-hmm.
some of those gains. And I've heard things politically that, after the whole George Floyd situation, and you saw all of this, all of these organizations coming out, seemingly claiming they're in solidarity with African Americans. And, you heard reports of these independent Black bookstores selling out and, having to work overtime because people were, buying all of these Black books and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so now it seems, that been this backlash, at least that the administration, is promoting, and people are kind of certain people are kind of capitulating towards, it seems like, this sort of backlash. And I think, to your point, when you were saying one of the reasons of why you keep going with the collecting is because we don't know, what the future
Mm-hmm.
holds, and we don't know how aggressive things can get, and what could be removed or banned. And I think, living in Chicago, for Chicago is still a progressive city. We still have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of progressive people in key positions. We have a, mayor. I'm a teacher, elementary school teacher. I teach fourth and fifth grade.
Oh.
So, our mayor came out of the teachers union, although
Mm-hmm.
his approval rating is not very high. But when you're trying to make fundamental change and you're trying to change the levers of who has power, of course that's going to come with a lot of friction. Um, right now, the teachers union kind of has a lot of power. So I'm saying all that to say,
Mm-hmm.
we haven't really felt, at least not yet, the screws
Mm-hmm.
of anti-DEI. I know you've probably heard that,
Mm-hmm.
the Department of Education is investigating Chicago public schools because there's a program that is meant to promote the academic advancement of Black students.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're investigating Chicago public schools for that. But keep in mind, I mean, Chicago public schools is probably 90% minority. you know
Mm.
I mean, we're not, and I'm not, so when you're talking about anti-DEI, I mean, we're talking about a school district where it's mostly diverse. So I don't,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the whole thing is meant to really just be an intimidation um tactic. But I'm saying a lot to say, I think in times like these is where, as you were saying, I think I echo your own sentiments. Even if you may want to stop, it's just the pull and the importance of, when they're wanting to erase history or stomp it out, or not, to not have certain books. You feel like this is similar to these bibliophiles of yesteryear. They started because of, you don't have a history, and now that this is
Mm-hmm.
happening, you feel like, no, we have to keep going. Do you have any thoughts and ideas, if you even agree with this premise? Why do you think our history is intimidating to some, or seen as anti to some? What you know, I heard Jamie Foxx in an interview saying, you know, why do they have to hate on us? We gave
Mm-hmm.
the world R&B, and we gave, I'm
Mm-hmm.
watering down what he said, but
Mm-hmm.
they love our culture, but you know, don't want to, they want the rhythm without the blues. And so, I mean, what are your thoughts that you have about kind of this?
I think that Black history is very empowering to Black people. And I think that people are afraid that there may be consequences for people being empowered in that capacity. Because I think that some folks look at it as a world of the haves and the have-nots. So when you have all these different things that are empowering, and I think it also makes certain folks like jealous of like some of the like accomplishments and just the triumph that Black people have gone through. So that to me is part of the root of why there's such an attack on Black history. Um, it's because it is empowering and it does tell the truth, or at least an investment in wanting to at least know the truth, even if it gives you a glimpse. Folks are invested in at least knowing these different stories, knowing uh what it is, what it is to be true or not. And I think that that's a threat to people. And I guess it's been like that for, quite some time. And that is why I think that we're like in a new age of like where people are collecting, because now we have like a digital side of things. I think somebody asked me a question earlier this year about born digital collecting. So thinking about because there are some archival repositories they're collecting like emails for folks. Now, I do not want my
Mm.
emails collected or like my text messages collected. Could you imagine like if all of your stuff was just like on OneDrive, where that is an archival repository itself? But to get back to your question, I think that again, it's a threat because it's kind of like a sense of envy too and jealousy.
For sure. What advice would you give to others that want to build a Black book collection?
Um, Start out with collecting what you like. Start out with collecting what you like, and then you get to learn about other titles, about what you want. Just like even in this Facebook group, like I have learned the books that you post. Like I was like, oh, I didn't even know some of these books existed. Like even the NAACP book that you posted the other day, I was like, man, where? I didn't even know this book existed, because that's like the knowledge side of things. You get to learn about certain books that exist by either looking at references of other books that people are talking about, or thinking about like again being in social spaces where people get to exchange different books and different things and stuff like that. So I would again start to collect the things that you like to collect. For me, it started out with literally one book that I just wanted, and then I just happened to just keep collecting these different things that I was interested in.
Excellent. What books are you currently reading or are on your TBR right now?
It's crazy because I'm going through my like writing my comprehensive exam. So those are like all the books that I have to read, but I'm still looking through Laura Helton's book. I really, really, really like this book. And I remember speaking to her before this book was even out because it started
Mm.
out as her dissertation. Um, so I'm really looking through Laura Helton's book. I'm also reading what's that book by John Hope Franklin? It's a set of essays called Race and History. That's a really nice book that I've been reading. And there's a book, have you heard of it's about Chicago. It's called A Worthy Piece of Work. It's called The Untold Story of Madeline Morgan and the Fight for Black History in Schools by Michael
Yes,
Hines.
yeah, yes, and there's a gentleman in our group who had told me about that book.
Hmm.
Um and I have that book, got it not too recently.
Yeah, so I'm that's on my list to look at soon. So really those couple of books are like the immediate things that I'm looking at right now. Um, I haven't even thought about like what other books I'm interested in like trying to get and stuff like that, because I've just been so invested in different things, because I'm also like, so I'm the vice chairman for the historical commission for Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. So I'm like invested in trying to get archival materials for us, because those types of things are missing for a lot of different fraternities and different organizations. So um trying to balance my time and looking at the stuff.
For sure, definitely. Um, that's all the questions I have. I don't know, newbie, if you had any questions you want to ask before we close out. Jordan, was there anything else that you would like to, share with us or anything?
No, like I really appreciate this space. Like seriously, like I was telling folks, I was like, we need more spaces, especially folks interested in Black collecting. in these different practices, and it's nice to see like all these different folks like around the nation and around the world who are invested in whether that's in their spare time, like trying to build their own libraries. Again, telling us about certain books, like again, you have told me about some books. I'm like, where did this book come from? Like, how do you know about this? Like, what's the encyclopedia you put up the other day? I think you have the volume two, but you said you were looking for volume
Oh,
one.
right. Yeah. It's the sayings of it's in the group, but yeah, the sayings and thoughts or whatever of African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have the book near me, but yeah. And it's I think honestly, like living in Chicago, um and has there's always something literary that's going on. I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually not originally from Chicago. I'm from Arlington, which is in the Dallas Fort Worth area.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to Dillard undergrad, and then I would always come to Chicago in the summer because I was part of this grad school program called SROP SHROP,
Mm-hmm.
where they kind of reach out to minorities and you can do a research project over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So I would come during the summers to UIC, and then I ended up coming here for grad school and got a job and have been here since 2005. But Chicago is a very literary city in a lot of ways. I mean, they have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different book festivals here. They have a good amount of bookstores. When I first moved to Chicago in 2005, there were quite a few, even African American bookstores. A lot of them have closed now. But, just kind of being in this space, I've, have been exposed to a lot of books that I didn't know of before. Um, and then I'm one of those people who, when I get books, I like to look at the bibliography in the, back of the book. So that
Mm-hmm.
also like, it's like reading books kind of like opens up a box where you're confronted with
Mm-hmm.
a whole lot of other books.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's kind of how I have learned about a lot of books. And then they just comes, I've spent a lot of time like, like you were saying with eBay, searching up books, looking books, and it's kind of a hobby within itself, just searching and looking up books. And so
Mm-hmm.
before you know it, you it just accumulate, these different
Mm-hmm.
books. And then, people know me as, book obsessed. So they also will tell me about a lot of different books and things like that. Um, and like I say, I've been collecting a long time. I mean, I'm 42 years old. I'll be 43 next month. So, I've been collecting a number of years and just, over the years, you
Mm-hmm.
accumulate a lot of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I've also, and I can message you offline, but as a thank you, you may have seen it in the group, but I self-published a
Oh, I
little
got that. Yeah,
book.
I bought
Oh,
uh,
you bought it. Oh, okay.
it's over there.
Gonna say I was gonna send you a copy. As
I
a
bought
thank
it.
you. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your support. Um, so you're familiar with it, but I was gonna, send you a copy. Maybe I'll send you a copy of something else. Um, but so that's kind of been the journey. But thank you so much, for giving up some of your Memorial Day holiday and having this interview or conversation. We really appreciate it. Um, and other people will be able to see it also on Facebook. And I hope that your dissertation that either turn it into a book or eventually write your own book, because the subject that you're researching is of course fascinating to somebody like me, but it's also a story that needs to be told. And as we were kind of talking about in this conversation, there aren't a lot of books out there about that center Black bibliophiles or book collectors, and those stories, definitely
Mm-hmm.
need to be told. And so I think you're doing very important work, and hopefully you can continue to do that work, even when it's hard. Um, because that work is, very important, and those stories need to be told, those histories, need to be centered. And even when you were talking about um the oh my God, his name fell, the man who ran the Underground Railroad, or
Oh,
not ran,
William
but
Steele.
yes, William Steele,
Hmm.
and sort of how he had to, bury his archive is, I never knew that about him. And even we talked about with David Ruggles, I'm sure like, when he was credited as being the first to own a
Hmm.
bookstore, and unfortunately it fell to the hands of arsonists
Hmm.
because it was threatening. And I know, going back to the book I mentioned, Prose to the People,
Hmm.
there's a couple of bookstores that she talks about that were sabotage, whether they were burned down or even just as it got into the 60s and 70s, were surveilled by the FBI. Um,
Hmm.
and it was a heartbreaking story of, I think it's Drum and Spear in DC, of how, I mean, the FBI did some horrible things there, from detonating smoke bombs and being under FBI pressure. And just this, it seemed like there's a lot of stories of these Black bookstores being under direct assault, um,
Hmm.
just for existing. Um,
Yeah, it's
Unfortunately,
insane.
yeah,
And it's always a fire too. Like
right.
let's see, one of the organizations that I study for my dissertation is called the American Negro Historical Society, which is kind of like this bibliophile society. I mean, their first library and archives like was burned, like in a fire destroyed everything, and they had to restart at least some of those stuff, but most of those materials were gone. And then there's a like even thinking about newspapers, the Philadelphia Tribune, we only have like maybe from like 1912 until the present, when this
Mm,
newspaper was like the 1890s, but a fire destroyed the back copies of the original copy, so we will never know what those newspapers were reporting about. It's a black newspaper about Philadelphia and early Philadelphia, because fires destroyed these things, and oftentimes they were on purpose.
yeah.
So
It's it's so sad, which makes what you're doing, the work you're doing, the stories you're telling, even more, important and even more
mhm,
critical, so that future generations, know about this, and know about these things. And I try as much as I can to, you know, tell some of these stories with my own students.
mhm.
And so, thank you again, for this interview and for the work that you're doing. And thank you for being a part of the group.
Well,
Um,
thank you for inviting me. And I mean, again, it feels really awesome to be a part of a group where I get to see these different, like literally every day I'm checking the group, like what book Yolanda about to post now, like because it's so critical to have these different spaces, because there aren't a lot of spaces to be able to discuss these different things, and especially folks like I'm not always into like trying to be in an academic space. Like book people are from all different types of spaces. So again, I'm honored, and it was a pleasure to have a conversation with you all.
yes, thank you. Thank you. And when I started the group, of course, you don't know, you're like, oh, I don't know if anybody will join this group, but
Mhm.
I've just been very, grateful that there is a community and that people, have joined and have shared their own experiences, and, have made this group what it is. And, and the things that I post, I don't know what will resonate with people, or what doesn't. So I'm just grateful that, that people have joined this community, and, we're able to share into this space. And um, I think, given, some of the things going on in the timeline right now that we talked about, I feel like, this group is a bright spot. And
Mhm.
and that I'm happy to see that people are still, doing this work. And, Nubia, she has her own archive, and she, shares with
Mhm.
community, with People's Porch, and things that she's doing. And so, there's still a lot of people doing work and sharing with the
Mhm.
community. And part of this conversation series is to uplift what you all are doing to hopefully a broader audience. And promote the work you all are doing and your stories and things like that. So please, Jordan, keep us updated on your dissertation and everything. And, when you decide to write your books, please,
I
keep us
got y'all.
updated on that.
I got
Yeah.
y'all. Yeah, I'll share, some of the stuff every once in a while, especially that I'm finding within the archives and stuff like that. Some of the
All right.
stuff I've worked on at Penn. So Robert Purvis, the abolitionist, his library was technically acquired at Penn in like the 1890s, but they lost it. And we're
Mm.
just now trying to be able to find what his library actually looked like and what is actually there because they reconstructed the original Penn library now. So that's some of the things I'll share every once in a while to get y'all some knowledge on that.
Okay, excellent. Sounds good. Well, all right. Well, thanks so much and enjoy what's left of the day.
Indeed, indeed. Y'all too.
All right. Thanks. Have a good one.
You too.
All right.
Bye bye.
See you. Bye, Nubia.